GATT and WTO. WTO came into being on Jan 1st, 1995 and is the successor to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which was created in 1947 and continued to operate for almost 5 decades as a de facto international organization. In this lesson we discuss about the formation, clauses, agreement pertaining to GATT, WTO, and also make a critical evaluation. It follows from the previous slide that after studying this lesson, you should be able to explain the history of WTO, define GATT, describe cultural barriers. The history of GATT can be divided into 3 phases. The first, from 1947 until the Torquay Round, largely concerned with commodities, would be covered by agreement and freezing existing tariff levels. A second phase encompassing 3 rounds, from 1959 to 1979, focused on reducing tariffs. The third phase, consisting only of the Uruguay round from 1986 to 1994, extended the agreement fully to new areas such as intellectual property, services, capital, and agriculture. Out of this round, the WTO was born. The World Trade Organization deals with the rules of trade between nations at a near global level. It is responsible for negotiating and implementing new trade agreements and is in charge of policing member countries' adherence to all the WTO agreements, signed by the bulk of the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliaments. Most of the WTO's current work comes from 1986 to 1994 negotiation called the Uruguay Round, an earlier negotiation under the GATT. Its main mission is to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. Among the various functions of WTO, these are regarded by analysts as the most important. It oversees implementation, administration, and operation of the covered agreement. It provides a forum for negotiation and for settling disputes. The first principle of WTO is non-discrimination. It has 2 major components: the most favored nation or MFN rule and the national treatment policy. The MFN rule requires that a WTO member must apply the same conditions on all trade with other WTO members. The other principles include reciprocity, binding and enforceable commitments, transparency, and safety valves. Under the safety valves principle, in specific circumstances, governments are able to restrict trade. There are 3 types of provisions in this direction, called articles allowing for the use of trade measures to attain non-economical objectives, article aimed at ensuring fair competition, and provisions permitting intervention in trade for economic reasons. The structure of the WTO is dominated by its highest authority, the Ministerial Conference, composed of representatives of all WTO members, which is required to meet at least every 2 years and which can take decisions on all matters under any multilateral trade agreements. The day-to-day work of WTO, however, falls to a number of subsidiary bodies. Principally, the General Council, also composed of all WTO members, which is required to report to the Ministerial Conference. As well as conducting its regular work on behalf of the Ministerial Conference, the General Council convenes in 2 particular forms: as the dispute settlement body to oversee the dispute settlement procedure, and as the trade policy review body to conduct regular reviews of trade policies of individual WTO members. The process of becoming a WTO member is unique to each applicant country, and the terms of accession are dependent upon country's stage of economic development and current trade regime. The process takes about 5 years on average, but it can last more if the country is less than fully committed to the process, or if political issues interfere. As is typical of WTO procedures, all offer of accession is only given once consensus is reached among interested parties. The WTO has 151 members. The 27 states of European Union are represented also as the European communities. WTO members do not have to be fully sovereign nation members. Instead, they must be a customs territory with full autonomy in the conduct of their external commercial relations. A number of non-members have been observers at the WTO and are currently negotiating their membership. With the exception of the Holy See, observers must start accession negotiation within 5 years of becoming observers. Some international intergovernmental organizations are also granted observer status to WTO bodies. 15 states and 2 territories so far have no official interaction with the WTO. The Agreement on Agriculture is an international treaty negotiated during the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades and entered into force with the establishment of WTO on Jan 1, 1995. It rests on 3 pillars of domestic support, market access, and export subsidies to agricultural goods. The General Agreement on Trade in Service entered into force in Jan 1995 as a result of Uruguay round of negotiation. The treaty was created to extend the multilateral trading system to service sector. In the same way, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades (GATT) provides such a system for merchandise trade. In 2003, the United States challenged a number of EU laws restricting the importation of genetically modified organisms (GMO), arguing they are unjustifiable and illegal under SPS agreement in May 2006. The WTO's Dispute Resolution Panel issued a complex ruling which took issues with some aspects of the EU regulation of GMOs, but dismissed many of the claims made by the US. The Agreement on Trade-Related Investment measure applies to investment measure related to trade in goods only. The agreement restrains members from applying any investment measures that is inconsistent with the provisions of national treatment on internal taxation and regulation on general elimination of quantitative restrictions of the GATT 1994. The Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, also known as the TBT Agreement, is an international treaty of the World Trade Organization. It was negotiated during the Uruguay round of General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades and entered into force with the establishment of the WTO at the end of 1994. The main objective is to provide protection to the holders of intellectual property right, which can be claimed by an individual, company, or even people of a geographical location. Criticism of the WTO falls into 2 broad categories. Let us first take the first one. The WTO is very strongly committed to trade liberalization, which means a movement towards free trade both in the reduction and elimination of tariffs and removal of non-tariff barriers. In fact, the first 4 of WTO's principles are explicitly or implicitly about this. This pro-free trade position is firmly grounded in mainstream trade economics, particularly comparative advantage theory, which implies that free trade is an optimal system. Importantly, it is even good for poor, underdeveloped countries. Hence, the WTO's 5th principle about development. This, however, is controversial. There are some, particularly in development studies and development economics, who are doubtful that free trade and deregulation are in fact good for developing countries, or the best development paradigm. The other main criticism of WTO's philosophies come from environmental circles. It is felt that free trade deregulatory paradigm is detrimental to the environmental protection and preservation. Criticism of WTO practices and or structure focus on democratic or undemocratic nature of the organization. The point tend to separate into 2 related arguments. First, that the structure and personnel of WTO is undemocratic in various ways that lead to developed, richer countries winning out over less developed, poorer countries. Second, that while not actively biased or undemocratic, the WTO facilitates and permits powerful groups to dominate over others. Apart from this, the other main criticism of WTO practices would be that it does not implement its philosophy even-handedly. In particular, free trade arguments are used to open up the markets of third world countries, while the developed world retains all kinds of protectionist measures. In this view, the WTO has been a method of institutionalizing the accumulated advantage of developed countries. Culture is most often viewed as a language or religion of a country. But there is obviously more to culture than these two components. As Hofstede's model shows, a successful international business manager must know what cultural matters may affect developing relationships and impact they have financially on business venture. Financial issues are very much affected by language. Negotiations between a buyer and seller include price, delivery dates, shipping methods, and methods of payment. If either party is not completely fluent in the other party's language, misunderstanding may arise, which could lead to late payments or no payments at all. How religion plays a barrier can be understood by the example of US and some Islamic nation. In the US, business and religion are interrelated since there is a consideration of both secular and religious holidays in product offering, sales and distribution. What we rarely experience in the US is crossover between business law and religion. Such, however, is not the case all over the world. In countries where Islam is predominant religion, Sharia law is the body of Islamic law which regulates the public and some private aspects of life. The culture of the country may also determine the level of government's involvement that is present in a market. Laws developed based on a society and its religion will ultimately impact the business law structure of the country as well.
Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly.
GATT stands for General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, right or wrong?
Right.
WTO stands for World Trade Organization, right or wrong?
Wrong.
The AOA came into effect with the establishment of WTO, right or wrong? Before we end, let us briefly revise what we've studied till so far. The GATT was a product of post-war free trade movement. The GATT was successful in lowering trade barriers on manufactured goods and commodities. The move towards greater free trade under the GATT appeared to stimulate economic growth. The completion of the Uruguay round of GATT talks and establishment of the World Trade Organizations have strengthened the world trading system by extending GATT rules to services, increasing protection for international property, reducing agricultural subsidies, and enhancing monitoring and enforcement mechanism. Culture is an economic topic because it differs over time, by location and by age group. Trying to learn the details of every culture would be close to impossible. However, understanding that there are similarities and differences is the first hurdle. An important step before going abroad for business is that an international manager should prepare by researching the cultural norms, business etiquette, and the taboos. Developing strong personal relationships is critical. Culture does affect business and the ability for business to be financially successful. Culture may also determine the ways business is conducted and the speed at which transactions take place. Research, prepare, and be ready for anything to happen.